There's a piece of camouflage history that was buried so deeply in Cold War archives that even seasoned military historians only heard rumours of it. Not because it broke international law, not because it involved exotic materials, but because it worked so well that neither side wanted the other to understand why it was effective. It showed up in obscure Soviet field notes, in NATO technical evaluations, and in declassified reconnaissance failures where analysts couldn't figure out why they missed a vehicle or forward observer in broad daylight. This wasn't about fancy technology. It wasn't about thick ghillie suits or cutting-edge patterns. It was about a principle so simple and so brutally effective that it erased outlines and disrupted shapes in a way early satellites, border patrol optics, and even seasoned human spotters struggled to interpret. For decades, this method stayed in the shadows because the fewer people who knew about it, the longer it kept working. And today, when researchers recreate this approach, the results mirror those same Cold War reports. Detection fails, shadows blur, and silhouettes vanish. During the 1960s, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces conducted constant tests along their borders. Each side tried to spot reconnaissance teams, field equipment, and temporary observation posts hidden by the other. When declassified reports began surfacing decades later, a puzzling pattern appeared. Certain Soviet scout teams consistently avoided detection, even when NATO forces used high-quality lenses and low-altitude aircraft. Meanwhile, in the east, Soviet border guards often failed to detect small NATO forward observers who were positioned far closer than doctrine ever allowed. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that both sides had independently developed a similar approach to camouflage, one that didn't rely on colour or environmental matching, but on destroying shape recognition itself. This became known in some circles as phase disruptive texturing, though each military had its own terminology. What united all versions was their focus on altering the physics of how outlines form in natural light. Instead of focusing on a uniform pattern, the goal was to create micro-irregularities across the surface of uniforms and gear so that light never produced a stable shadow or highlight. The method involved applying extremely fine streaks, speckling, and uneven surface texture to break the continuity of any object's edge. A flat surface reflects light predictably. A curved surface casts a predictable shadow. But once you disrupt these surfaces with chaotic microtextures, light scatters unpredictably, and the silhouette appears broken or incomplete. This tricks both human eyes and optical devices into treating the object as part of the background. During experiments, engineers found that even minimal phase disruption could outperform larger, more elaborate camouflage patterns because the technique attacked the foundation of detection, the boundary line. If there is no clean boundary, there is no target. Reproducing this method today can be done with basic materials. Start with a base layer that blends with the general terrain tone, whether forest brown, scrub green, or light earth. Next, apply microstreaks using narrow brushes, sponges, or a coarse cloth dipped lightly in diluted paint. The streaks should vary in length, thickness, and direction. There should be no repeating rhythm to them. After creating the streak layer, add fine speckling. This can be done by tapping a stiff brush or lightly flicking pigment, creating hundreds of tiny irregular marks. The final step is surface disruption. Attach a thin mesh or light netting loosely over the treated item. Allow it to hang unevenly so that shadows fall in unpredictable ways. The combined effect mimics the phase disruptive method used in Cold War scouting units. One practical application is concealing gear when filming or observing wildlife. A camera set on a tripod, covered with a disrupted mesh overlay, becomes significantly harder to detect on drone footage compared to standard camouflage wraps. Another example is a field shelter. A simple tarp, treated with micro-texture paint and covered with light, irregular netting, blends far more effectively in mixed foliage than standard camo tarps because it denies observers a stable surface to interpret. The strength of this technique was not that it matched the environment perfectly, but that it remained effective when conditions shifted. Traditional camouflage fails when color palettes change from season to season, or when lighting hits surfaces at odd angles. Phase disruptive texturing, however, works across multiple lighting conditions because it relies on structural disruption rather than color matching. It broke up silhouettes during sunrise, high noon, overcast days, and even under snow glare. This made it ideal for long-term reconnaissance missions where operatives couldn't adjust their gear daily. Another overlooked advantage was durability. Since the method relied on microtexture rather than vegetation or bulky fabric, it resisted moisture, didn't trap heat, and didn't degrade after hours of movement. That reliability alone made it worth keeping classified. This forgotten camo technique teaches an enduring lesson. The most effective concealment isn't about pretending to be the environment. It's about sabotaging the process of recognition. When you break outline, break structure, and break the way shadows form, you make detection unreliable. Modern survival enthusiasts, researchers, and filmmakers who adopt phase-disruptive methods find themselves using a system that quietly stood at the core of Cold War scouting success. It remains evergreen because it attacks a visual truth that hasn't changed. If this deep look into lost Cold War fieldcraft expanded your understanding, make sure to subscribe to In the Beginning and share this guide with fellow history and survival enthusiasts. The more these forgotten techniques resurface, the richer our appreciation of the Cold War's hidden innovations becomes.